Hi guys, in this episode we're going to cover time signatures, a waltz, 4/4, common time, cut time, ties, dots, double dots, deemed notes, a duration comparison between different rhythmic notation symbols, downbeats, upbeats, half note triplets, and quarter note triplets. Let's get right to it. Time signatures tell you how many times you should tap your foot to complete one measure and what type of note represents one beat. As stated in an earlier episode, measures are indicated in between bar lines. So here's a bar line and here's a bar line. That's one measure. Here's a bar line. Here's a bar line. That's two measures. The beat itself corresponds with the tapping of your foot. Every time your foot taps, one beat or pulse occurs. So for example, in 4/4 or common time as is notated here, each one of these notes would correspond with your foot tapping. A time signature essentially defines how beats are grouped together into dependable patterns. These dependable beat patterns constitute a typical measure in a particular time signature. For example, a grouping of 3 beats per measure is a dependable pattern. Notice this says 3/4. This is what it sounds like. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. This pattern in 3 is also known as a waltz. A grouping of 4 beats per measure is yet another kind of dependable pattern. A 4/4 time signature, known as common time, gives you this information. The top number tells you the number of beats per measure. The bottom number tells you what type of note is assigned to one beat. In other words, the number above the line in a time signature tells you how many beats or how many times you tap your foot must go by before a measure has ended. The number below the line identifies the type of note that is assigned to the beat, or your tapping foot. In this example, a quarter note is assigned to each beat. To more easily illustrate this, look at this example. Here's your top number represented as a fraction telling you the number of beats per measure, and in this case it's 4/1, or 4 beats per measure. You multiply that by 1/4. This is what type of note is assigned one beat. In this case, it's quarter notes. By multiplying these together, we arrive at 4 beats per measure, where quarter notes represent the pulse or the tapping of your foot. Please note that any amount of beats per measure is possible. You could have a time signature of 7/4 or even 63/4 if you wanted to. It just identifies how many beats or pulses are required before one measure ends. But note that while 7/4 is a valid time signature, a time signature of 4/7 is not possible. There is no such thing as a 7th note, therefore a 7th note cannot be assigned to each beat, and the 4/7 time signature cannot exist. To illustrate a different time signature, this example demonstrates how a time signature of 2/2, otherwise known as cut time, is created. The top number of the fraction indicates the number of beats per measure. In this case, it's 2, or 2/1, meaning 2 beats per measure. The bottom note of the fraction is what type of note is assigned to one beat. In this case, it's half notes. So by multiplying 2/1 by 1/2, we come up with 2/2, which means 2 beats per measure where half notes represent the pulse or the tapping of your foot. So in other words, in 2/2, there's 2 beats per measure, and each time you tap your foot, that represents a half note. So in cut time, there are 2 beats per measure, which would be counted 1/2, 1/2, etc. This means you would only count to 2 in a measure. Then you would start over by counting 1 as the first beat of the next measure, and so forth. Your foot would also come down on every one of those counted beats, and the type of note that would be assigned to that beat or pulse is a half note. So everything written in a 2/2 time signature is relative to a half note, which is what the beat is assigned to in 2/2. Ties are a way of connecting 2 neighboring notes of identical pitch with an arched line so that there is only one attack, but the duration of the notes remain the same. Let's look at this example to illustrate this. 1/8 note has exactly half the time duration as 1/4 note. 2/8 notes will take up the same amount of time or space as 1/4 note. 2 untied 8th notes, however, will each have a separate attack. The first 8th note will have its attack on the beginning of the beat, while the second 8th note will have its attack at the halfway point of the beat, evenly dividing the beat. Tying the 2/8 notes together nullifies the attack of the second note while retaining the second 8th note's duration. Therefore, tying 2/8 notes together is exactly the same as a quarter note. It's just a different way of writing the same rhythm. Here are some other examples of this. 4 tied quarter notes are the same as one whole note. A half note and 2 quarter notes tied together are the same as one whole note, and 2 16th notes and an eighth note tied together are the same as one quarter note. Each of these sound the same, but are written differently, sort of the rhythmic version of enharmonic equivalence. When using ties, remember that only the first note's attack is played. All subsequent tied notes are simply sustained from the original attack. The rest of the notes that are tied to the first note do not have an attack. Adding a dot to a note or rest to the right of the note head or rest marking adds half the value of the note or rest to it. A dotted quarter note, for example, has the time value of one quarter note plus half its value. In this case, half the value of a quarter note is an eighth note, so a dotted quarter note is the equivalent of a quarter note with an eighth note tied to it. In example 2, we see that a dotted eighth note is the same as an eighth note with a 16th note tied to it. Examples 3 and 4 are simply the equivalents of examples 1 and 2, but with rests instead of notes. Dots are added for ease of notation purposes as well as for clarity in written music. Dots require less pen strokes than writing the rhythm with ties and prevents a cluttered look on the written page. Adding a double dot to a note or rest adds half the value of the note to it, plus half of that half's value, or half plus 1/4 of the original note's value. Take a look at the double dotted half note in this example. Half of a half note is a quarter note. Half of a quarter note is an eighth note. So a double dotted half note is the same as tying together a half note with a quarter note and an eighth note. As stated in a prior episode, 8th and 16th note flags can be beamed together to reduce the number of pen strokes. Here are a few examples. Again, the rhythms that have equal signs between them are exactly the same. They are just written differently. There are no equivalents of beamed notes for rests. Rests are not beamed. Exercise 1A shows how the duration of the various rhythms compare to each other. It is important that you practice tapping your foot to these rhythms. Each measure has icons of a foot above it, showing how your foot should look while you are counting. The proper way of counting the rhythms is also written above each measure. The triplets are added last. The reason for this is simple. While all of the other rhythms divide the measure or the beat into even segments into divisions of 2 or 4, triplets divide the measure, beat, or beats into odd segments, into evenly spaced divisions of 3. Extra attention should be devoted to the practice of switching from 16th notes to triplets, or vice versa, as it is difficult to play and feel. Let's go ahead and listen to this exercise. Try to tap your foot and count along. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet. Notice on the eighth notes how the foot is in the down position on 1 and in the up position on the an of 1. It's also in the down position on 2 and the up position on the an of 2. When a note falls on a beat, it is said to be a downbeat, or the strong part of the beat. The an is considered the weak part of the beat and is therefore called the upbeat. So, downbeat, upbeat, etc. Exercise 1B demonstrates how rest and notes compare to each other. Let's try this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2, 3, 4. 1 E and 2, 3, 4. Exercise 1C demonstrates how the 8th, 16th, and triplets are written without beamed flags. Note the lines I have added to each of these measures to show where beats 1, 2, 3, and 4 fall. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet. In exercise 1D, I've added some rhythms that aren't subdivisions, but you may encounter them, so I've added them here for you to practice. This is the only place in the book that you'll see them. These additional rhythms are half-note triplet groupings like this, and quarter-note triplet groupings like this. Half-note triplet groupings are relatively rare, but quarter-note triplet groupings aren't. Let's hear how these sound. 1, 2, 3, 4, triple, let. 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 Triple, let. 3, 4, triple, let. 3, 4, triple, let. 3, 4, triple, let. 3, 4. With all of these rhythms, you need to internalize the rhythms by sight and associate these notated rhythms with a particular memorized sound. Hey, thanks for watching the video. Be sure to like and leave a comment below if you have any questions. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button. If you like the music you've been listening to, please check out my friends Andrea Miller and Ron Kobayashi's album Fly Like an Eagle at this link.
Breath you take, every move you make, every bond you break, every step you take, I'll be watching you. Every single day, every word that you say,